Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the QuietCarry Knives Drift. Very, very interesting knife, and one that I'm super with, the moment I handled one, it was like, yes, I'd like that on my table. And so there we go. But first off, in the name of full disclosure, this guy was actually provided to me as a review sample from QuietCarry Knives. In fact, he ended up sending two of them. One is just a purely charitable donation, so that's kind of a beautiful thing, nevertheless. But we have to assume, though, that this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys, well, two of these guys ever, and I've done my best not to let this affect the nature of my review. I sent the guy my full good, the great, the bad, the ugly little spiel there, and he still sent it along. So nonetheless, though, that's what we got going on. We have to assume, though, I've already said that part. So we can just move on to the next part, which is a size comparison. Here it is against the Ontario Spyderco PM2. This is just the Spyderco PM2, but I'm not a brilliant man, so I started off by saying Ontario, like in the Ontario Rat number 2 right here. Yeah, Rat 2. You can see here that size-wise, in terms of sharpened blade length, we're actually very similar to the Rat 2 in terms of, well, sharpened blade length. Wow, it's been a day, hadn't it? Ooh. But here it is against the Rat 2. Here it is against your Spyderco Delica. So you can see here, again, in terms of sharpened length, we're not so far off the Delica, although it is actually a very compact knife. And in terms of thickness, actually, we are just a little bit... actually, we might be right the same thickness as the Delica. So it's a very thin knife in the pocket, which is a beautiful thing. And then actually, actually two other size comparisons that I want to do real quick. This is a Spyderco Native 5 in LC200N steel. And in a lot of ways, actually, there were similarities in the design, both in terms of the overall presentation, in terms of the overall, but also in terms of what they're doing here. This is also in a rust-proof steel. This is LC200N versus this being a Vanax Super Clean. And then here it is against another stainless titanium knife. This is the Spyderco Spidey Chef. A Martin Schlisch design, swish, I'm trying. Anyways, and so these are, there's a pretty natural comparison going on here, even though the Drift is a bit pricier. So there you go. And then finally, what the heck's a QuietCarry? Well, QuietCarry's a company. They have been relatively quiet, the knife market. They sell their own stuff, I think, pretty much exclusively through their own site. And so that's something to keep in mind. But I've reviewed a bunch of their stuff before. I've reviewed the West. I've reviewed the IQ. I reviewed the, not the Gambit. Maybe it's the Gambit? Bandit. Well, it ended with an it. I think it's a bandit. Anyways, nevertheless, QuietCarry's done actually a bunch of really interesting little stuff, a lot of weird stuff. They tend to surprise me, and this was another example of that, because actually, the way that I found out about this knife is I was wandering around Blade Show West, and it was just like, and I walk up to the QuietCarry booth, they got these on the table, it's just like, whoa, this is a cool design. I said, yeah, Blade Steel's Vanax. Wait, I'm sorry, what? Because this is one of the very first commonly available production knives available in Vanax. Like Shirogorov had it for a while, and I don't even think there's been a Spyderco Mule Team in it. I mean, so that was out of left field. Oh, by the way, knife's completely rust-proof. Oh, by the way, and then you look at the blade style, and so it was just like, wait, what? Holy crap, what do you back it up there? And so right then, at that moment, it was just like, this is an amazing piece. And in fact, this knife was the knife that most excited me at Blade Show West. As far as I'm concerned, this knife won the show. And in fact, I think it was chosen as best EDC, a best folding pocket knife, or something like that, in their official judging. So it blew a lot of people away, but it blew me away particularly. So I'm very happy to have spent actually a lot of time with this guy. I ended up probably carrying this for like a week and change, which for me actually is a fair amount of time, just to make sure everything was, I was on the right page with myself. So let's go on ahead, and after all that carry, which ain't all that much, but it'll get more, don't worry, we'll go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, the ugly of this very interesting little knife right here. So first off, on the good side, this guy, the price on it is fine. A lot of people have been saying it's $315, holy crap, but the thing is, look at what you're getting here. You are getting a completely rust-proof knife. You're getting a knife in well-heat-treated, hard Vanax Super Clean steel, which is not something that's easily available right now, and is a very, very good performer based on my time with it. Getting a super thin slicey, I mean, sure, it's pricey. Sure, there you can buy a lot of knives for that price. And you can even get like the natives, a rust-proof one, like $100, the Spidey Chef 200, but it's good. It's real good, and so I don't really have a big problem with that. It's a high-end price. I wouldn't want to see it go much higher, but I think it's absolutely in line with what you're doing there. So there's that. Next thing, size on this guy is very nice. What we see here is blade length-wise, we are coming in right around 3 inches here, which makes this legal in a lot of places, which is a beautiful thing. It's also very thin. Like I mentioned here, if I hold this guy up to a ruler, we are seeing this guy comes in very easily under a centimeter or so. You know, yeah, that's pretty small. This is not a thick knife particularly, and in fact, in silhouette, this guy comes in a little bit smaller than the Delica, although slightly differently silhouetted. And it is thinner than the Delica, you know, sort of. Yeah, I guess it is slightly thinner. So this carries amazingly well. It's also relatively lightweight. It's not the lightest thing ever, oh my God, but at the same time, you know, we're looking at a 3-inch blade here, and we're coming in at 2.7 ounces. Yeah, that's pretty light. And so I appreciate that very, very much. Next thing, you do get some other configurations. They have these guys in black. They also have a beautiful texturing on the front of them. They have one of them that's got like a full front knurling, which I can see if you're working in really damp conditions, that could be a nice thing for that, so do keep that in mind. You have a very nice clip on this. This seems to be a variant. It's sort of a wire clip variant, but it's well positioned such that you don't actually, at least with my hands, you don't end up getting that painful hot spot down in the bottom that you often will with a wire clip. When I'm gripping it in this particular grip. If I choke back a little bit for the for a lower grip, you do get a little bit of a hot spot off the clip there, but it's well positioned and it's a really nice clip generally. Wire clips are a beautiful thing, and with this nice deep carry, it's a very unassuming thing to throw in the pocket. Next thing, this guy is running on phosphor bronze washers. Now, this isn't necessarily, there are lots of great knives on bearings, lots of great knives on washers, but it's nice to see washer work these days. So many people are doing just bearing knives lately, and so seeing more washers and good smooth washer actions, that's a great thing. And in fact, this guy is relatively smooth. I haven't carried it for all that long, but it's already smoothing out pretty substantially, and it's in that state where it's, you know, it's good to go in terms of smoothness, and, you know, it could probably use another clean out here. I've been carrying it a fair amount here, so that's good. Next thing, this guy has a nice design. I mean, I'm a big fan of the QuietCarry aesthetic generally. You know, the 4 holes thing, and the fact that they're present on both sides, but not in the same position, which is one of those things that you notice afterwards, like, oh, they're in the same position, but they're not on the same part of the knife. It's good. You get like an internal lock bar relief here. You get the nice stonewash on this guy. I mean, frankly, this is a very nice stonewash on the titanium, generally speaking. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. I mean, design-wise, it's actually quite nice. And the fact that you've got good accessibility for the hole on both sides there, I mean, it's a pretty nice little design here, and I've been a fan of QuietCarry's design work in the past, and I remain a fan here. The worst thing you can say about it is it's a little vanilla. It looks like some other things, but there's a certain point where I think a lot of things look like other things, so I'm not really dragging them over the coals on that one too much. Next thing, the blade on this guy, and this would be the great for any other freaking knife, but the blade on this is amazing, because what we have here is very, very thin blade stock. If we compare this guy to the Spyderco Delica, we can see that the blade stock thickness on the Delica is actually thinner, and this remains a quite nearly full flat grind. And so as a result, this is very, very thin behind that edge. It is absolutely super freaking thin, and I really do appreciate that. This knife cuts like crazy. Using this guy is just a pleasure for actually doing cutting tasks. I'm very, very happy about that. But in addition, the steel on it is Vanax Super Clean. Now, of course, there's more to good steel than good chemistry, but it sure helps. And the fact that it's heat-treated by Peter's Heat Treat to a very high hardness, and this is indeed a very hard steel. I actually took the time to sharpen this guy by hand with some diamond plates, and this is a hard steel. And you can strop it up. It's just, Vanax is a nice steel, but this is run very, very well. And so I'm very, very impressed with this. Plus, you've got this very nice finger choil, which also serves as a sharpening choil. The blade on this is just great. There was not a day that I was carrying this when I was doing cutting. I just felt like, oh my God, yes, this cuts so very, very nicely. I'm a big, big fan of this blade. And so the fact that you get an exotic chemistry with good heat treat, plus a really good blade geometry, edge, all of that, oh, I'm loving this freaking blade. And so on the good side, to me, all of that. The blade is amazing. It's got nice design. Phosphor bronze washes, a great clip, lots of other textures, a very nice size, and a price that I think is fine, all things considered. On the great side to me, although I went back and forth as to whether it was the blade or this, but the fact that this knife is designed from the ground up to be completely stainless is an absolutely beautiful thing. And I don't just mean like, oh, it's a stainless steel. No, I mean most steels are stainless. That means they stain less. But Vanax is one of those steels that is, if it is able to rust I've been unable to. I actually decided I was going to test this. I went ahead and I kept one of these guys, and God bless my wife for allowing me to do these kinds of things. I just kept one of these guys in the shower, like on a little shelf where it got splashed regularly. And so every day I would get in the shower, I would splash the knife in the corner, I'd put a little bit of salt on it, just on the whole thing, and then let it soak. And then the next day I'd come back and I'd do the same thing again. And this knife didn't care. Like every day, it was just like sitting there like, you're going to try and make me rust again. That ain't going to work. And it was kind of adorable. That's a weird, God, I live such a strange life. I'm sorry, it all just hit me at once. Anyways, they have taken active steps. Not only is this steel rust resistant, but also the lock bar insert. They made the lock bar insert out of LC200N, which is the same blade steel that's being used here. That's magnificent. The hardware on it is titanium. This is an absolutely beautiful knife, but it also just happens to be completely freaking rust-proof. And the fact that he went the extra mile to make sure that even the lock bar insert wasn't going to rust, that's great. That is just really excellent, because this provides a really nice choice for somebody who lives in a very humid environment. If you are a swamp witch and are looking for a perfect, classy, small carry, then by God, this is going to be the knife for you. And so to me, at least, that's what's great about this guy, is that despite having all those other nice things, it happens to be stainless. Like completely just rust. You don't have to think about it. And that's just freaking awesome. So that to me is the great. On the bad side, like I did say, that the design is a little less unique than some. In a lot of ways, it feels a lot like a lot of knives. I mean, you could see maybe the Spyderco Native there, or actually, I should have grabbed this ahead of time. But another common thing that people brought up was like Ferrum Forge. In some ways, you can see some similarities there. This is the Archbishop. Knock off the flipper, maybe a little bit. But nevertheless, this guy is definitely, it's not the most avant-garde design. Compared to the IQ, which seems to have come roughly out of nowhere, or at least it doesn't look like anything I'm aware of. That's kind of nice. Next thing, I'm sorry, but nevertheless, it is a little bit more derivative, or at least it sure feels that way in the modern market. Whatever, not a huge deal. Next thing that's not a huge deal, the top of the lock bar here actually has a bit of a sharp corner there. I could see just a little bit of chamfering right there would do them a little bit of good. You can see that they've done a little, but they need to do a little more. Not a huge deal, though. The stock on this guy, I love thin blade stock. That's great, but one thing to consider is if you're really bearing down, this is to the point of thin stock in this sharpening choil, or a finger choil, that is, where it's almost getting uncomfortable. So I'd like to see that round it off just a little tiny bit more. Just crown that just a little bit more, and it'll feel just a little bit comfier in the hand. By the way, you can see there's almost a nice little stonewash mirror thing going on there. That's a beautiful thing. But anyways, so the stock is a little thin for a sharpening choil. Next thing, the centering isn't perfect actually on either of these guys. Both of them came with centering that is very slightly favoring the show side. This is very, very dependent on the basically the tension of the pivot here. And I suspect that as these guys smooth out more, they're going to be, they'll come back more into center because, well, it'll be easier to run the pivot at higher, what am I saying here? Run the pivot a little tighter. That'll pull it more towards the show or toward the lock side, but still, it's not something that's ideal on a knife this expensive. Speaking of the pivot screw, I actually have had trouble on both of these guys with the pivot screw actually loosening itself a little bit. And I do worry because it's titanium hardware. Titanium hardware has the potential to be a little bit soft, so you do definitely want to be careful and use the right driver as you're going through and doing that. So there you go. Next thing, the opening hole on this guy. So on the website, QuietCarry shows this guy as a thumb opener, and that's fine. It's something you can do. You need to make sure that your finger's not resting on the lock bar, which makes the detent a little harder than you'd like it to be. But you can thumb this guy open. I'm not super good at it. Like, my thumb geometry doesn't make it. For me, I have to sort of get this guy out in a weird thing and then pull it open. You can definitely do that. And it's very easy to two-hand open. But for me, at least, the way I ended up opening this all the time was using a flick, where I put my index finger here and then flick it open. You need a little tiny bit of wrist on this guy because the detent's a little weak, but nevertheless, this opening hole, because they've rounded this top corner here, you don't get a whole lot of purchase on it. If I just try and kind of put my thumb up this way, my thumb comes flying off of there. That is one of the main advantages of having a rounded hole like Spyderco does, is you can just leave your thumb in there and then guide it the way out. Whereas this guy, it's not so compelling as a thumb opener. Maybe if I got better. And also the other thing about thumb opening is, take a look right here. As I'm opening this guy, I'm going to keep the blade fixed, but you're going to see that the handle actually moves through the thumb hole there. And that has the potential to knock your thumb out of the position there. That's not great. And so I don't think this is a great thumb opener, but it flicks absolutely wonderfully. So I can live with that. Next thing, I would like to see a little bit better access to the lock bar here. The lock bar itself is relatively smooth, which means that especially with wet hands, it's going to be hard to get in there. And because the blade stock is thin, there's a very little area to get into there. So I'd just like to see a little tiny bit more carve out right here to allow me to get over at that lock bar just a little bit more readily. It's not at the point yet where it's a flat out problem. I've had knives where it's just like mash your thumb in there and hope for the best, but this is definitely an area where just a little tiny, a millimeter, half a millimeter more a carve out here could make a big difference for it. Then finally on the bad side, and this is actually, no, it's not really borderline ugly, because honestly, it's fine. I'm just really nitpicking this hard. The detent isn't great on this guy. They've addressed this, actually. The second one that they sent, actually, the first one has a relatively weak detent. The second one has a much stronger lock bar tension, which has the consequence of increasing the detent strength. And they're trying to address this in the existing models using lock bar tension, but I really think that this is an illustration of the fact that there are two sources of detent in a pocket knife. Usually there is the ball itself sticking into the blade, which provides the initial, because you have to lift the lock bar out in order to get the knife blade moving, and then there's lock bar tension, which is forcing the amount of force keeping that in the hole. I think that this could use a little bit more detent ball prominence, and that would give it a bit more of a poppy feeling. And given that this guy is definitely a flicker, I could definitely like to see just a little tiny bit more detent on both of these guys. And unfortunately, when you put the lock bar tension up, it's a little harder to unlock. So there's sort of this is something that I'd like to see them fixed. It just needs a little bit more pop, or you can make this opening hole a little less rounded off here and make it a little easier to get in there and use it as a thumb opener. Because if you put a little more detent in there, it's going to be harder for you to open it with your thumb. But anyways, for flicking purposes, this guy is absolutely, it just needs a little bit more in the way of detent. It's not bad. I mean, I can do it reliably. 100%. I've gotten to the point now where it's very easy for me to flick this guy open. And like I said, you need this. Can I do it with no wrist at all? Not quite. You just need the slightest bit of wrist, and then you got it open. But it's still, I could use just a bit more detent on this guy. And I think that's the biggest tweak I'd like to see in version 2, is a little bit more detent, and ideally, a little bit more lock bar access. So to me, at least, that's what's bad, is that the detent on this guy needs a little bit of refinement. It needs better lock bar access. The rounded opening hole thing, well, the rounded portion here of the opening hole isn't really doing it for me. The pivot screw is loosening itself a little bit. The centering isn't perfect. The stock is a little thin for an ergonomic finger choil. There is this sharp corner at the top of the lock bar, and the design does feel a little bit less unique than QuietCarry's other stuff. On the ugly front, I'm not seeing anything ugly really here, so let's go to the final conclusion. So, final conclusion. This guy actually took me a long time to review. I ended up carrying this guy, like I said, a fair amount, and it took me a while to figure out why I was having so much trouble with it. Because at some level, this knife is absolutely magnificent. In fact, at most levels. It's got a thin blade with a very thin edge. It's got an amazing steel to it. It's a very carryable form. It's ergonomic, and just, on the side, it happens to be completely rust-proof. That's good. All of that adds up to very, very good. Frankly, all of that adds up to pretty amazing. But it's got these couple of little frustrating issues. The loosening screw, the lock bar access, the detent. Those are the big things where it's just like, and the screw I can probably fix with some Loctite, but the detent thing is just like, so close yet so far, and at some level, I think that's the source of my frustration. That's why this was so damn hard to review, and that's why it was almost frustrating to review. I kept carrying this knife and feeling frustrated, and it's not because it's bad. In no way, shape, or form. It's because the knife is amazing. Pardon the baseball metaphor, but in the game of baseball, if you are able to hit the ball so hard that it goes out of the ballpark, that is a good thing. You score points, and you win as a human, if not winning the game. It is an absolutely wonderful thing. This is an example of an out-of-the-park home run where it is clearly heading out of the park. Everyone looks and goes like, oh, somebody's going to need to buy a new windshield. But as it's going there, it just, pink, hits a light pole or something and lands back in the bleachers. Like, everybody knows it was heading there, but it just got blocked. And that's kind of how I feel a little tiny bit about this knife. because those little tiny issues there, the detent thing and the lock bar access, it's just like, you were so close. You were the chosen one, Anakin. It left me feeling a little bit frustrated. I kept carrying this guy because it's so damn good. I kept loving it, and I kept being very happy to carry it, but there's always that little tiny sense of just like, almost so freaking close. And so there's that frustration from those little tiny issues, but in the end, that doesn't diminish the excellence of what we've got going on here. This knife is amazing. It is an absolutely great knife, and I would go so far as to say it is easily a gem. And in fact, it is one of the best knives of the year. And in fact, had they nailed all those little tiny things, this would almost certainly have been the knife of the year. And even still, it's a strong, strong contender, and I haven't filmed that video yet. But nevertheless, this knife is really, really good, because not only have they done solid good things like making a knife that actually freaking cuts, but they've done cool technology things using really nice steels, making it rust. All of those things just add up to like, whoa, holy crap. And that's kind of how I still feel about it. Just like, damn, that's really impressive. And it came out of nowhere. Like I said, I walk up to QuietCarry's booth and just like, wait, what? It went from just like, oh, that's kind of pretty, to whoa, very, very, very abruptly. QuietCarry keeps ambushing me with these weird, super compelling things. The IQ was another example of this, and so they're definitely a brand that I'm watching. And I really very much hope that they're talking with the factory and making a little couple of tweaks to the detent, to maybe the lock bar, etc., and the next round, because they're just little tiny things, but they would make all the difference in the world. So generally speaking, my feeling is that this knife, even as it stands right now, is awesome. There is absolutely no question that it is a great knife, and at this point, I am going to not be requiring the Spidey Chef or the Native Salt, because I have a rust-proof knife that I just like more. I mean, we can go there pretty readily. And so I'm really, really impressed with it, and I think the next version, or at least not next version, I think just calling the factory and saying, hey guys, just make the ball stick out more, that's completely diminishing the skill involved in all of this. But still, I think with a couple of little tweaks, this is amazing. But still, QuietCarry, good job. And I hope you've got those little tiny things planned, because right now, it's really amazing. It's a knife I can very easily recommend. And with just that little tiny bit of refinement, you've got yourself one of the very best high-end knives available, particularly if rust resistance means anything at all. So, absolutely, this is a well-done thing. And hey, you should consider having a special run of these guys made in Japan. That way it could be the QuietCarry Tokyo Drift. Okay. Anyways, I hope that you have drifted off into a good place while watching this review, and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.